"Your money's mine now, old man. Just sit there and wait to pass away," my son James said, scrolling his phone, not even looking at the man who raised him alone. Sarah, his wife, smiled from the doorway like she was watching her masterpiece unfold. But their cruelty didn't stop at words. What came next broke something inside me that could never be repaired. They thought I was just another helpless 73-year-old they could destroy piece by piece. What I constructed in the shadows would teach them that some old men are far more dangerous than they appear. They had no idea what was coming. Before I tell you how I fought back against my own son, drop a comment with your city. Monday mornings in my Portland kitchen used to be peaceful. At 73, I'd perfected the routine. Coffee at 6:30, breakfast for 3. The familiar sound of the coffee maker gurgling was my daily meditation. I reached for James's favorite mug, World's Best Son, one I'd bought him years ago when his footsteps echoed down the stairs. Early for him, maybe we'd finally talk like we used to. "Morning, son," I called out. "Coffee's ready. Want some eggs?" "We need to talk, Dad." His voice was different, flat, businesslike. When I turned, James stood in the doorway, fully dressed for work, but his expression was cold as winter steel. "Of course, sit down. I'll pour you some." "No, I'll stand. This won't take long." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "Sarah and I have been discussing your situation." "My situation? What situation?" "Your finances, your inability to manage money properly." He still wasn't looking at me. "We've made some decisions." The spoon in my hand felt heavier suddenly. "What kind of decisions?" That's when he finally looked up, and I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. "Your money's mine now, old man. Just sit there and wait to pass away." The spoon fell from my hand, clattering against the tile. The sound echoed in the sudden silence like a gunshot. Before I could process what I'd heard, he continued, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "From now on, Dad, let me handle all the finances. Your Social Security, your pension, everything goes through me. You don't need to worry about bills or banking anymore. That's too complicated for someone your age. Just focus on staying out of the way." Sarah appeared behind him like a shadow gaining substance, her smile perfectly practiced. "It's for your own good, William. You're too old to handle money anymore. We've seen how confused you get." Confused? I'd been a structural engineer for 40 years, managed complex budgets that kept buildings standing and people safe. This wasn't about my capabilities. This was about their greed. "Son, that's my Social Security. I worked 45 years. The decision's made." James cut me off, pocketing his phone. "Social Security goes to my account next week. Sarah already talked to the bank. Everything's arranged." The casual cruelty broke something inside me. Not anger, that would come later. What broke was hope. Hope that my boy was still somewhere inside this cold stranger. I bent to pick up the spoon, my mind racing. Every instinct screamed to fight, to argue, to demand respect. But engineering taught me something valuable. When a structure fails, you analyze first. So I stayed quiet, watched them grab their travel cups and head for the door. Sarah's heels clicked with military precision. James's shoulders were rigid, like someone convincing himself he was doing right. The front door closed with finality. I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by breakfast for people who no longer saw me as family. Through the window, I watched their car pull away. I had 7 days before they took my Social Security, 7 days to figure out what to do. But as I stood there in the morning light, something shifted inside me. They expected a helpless old man. They were about to discover they'd picked the wrong engineer to mess with. The silence they left behind felt heavier than concrete. I found myself in the living room, staring at the mantelpiece where decades of memories stood frozen in silver frames. The coffee in my hands had grown cold. I remembered when James was 8, how he cried when his mother passed on. The photo that always drew my attention showed the 3 of us at Cannon Beach. James's gap-toothed grin between Margaret and me. That was 2 months before the drunk driver took her away. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I had to wake James up to tell him his mother was never coming home. He crawled into my lap and sobbed until there were no tears left. That night, I promised him I'd be enough for both parents. Portland construction became my lifeline and burden. I took every overtime shift, worked weekends, picked up side projects. When that wasn't enough, I sold Margaret's jewelry, her car, anything convertible to tuition money. James never knew about the sacrifices. I wanted him to focus on being a kid, then a student, then a successful adult. And he was successful. Graduated from Portland State with an engineering degree, got a good job with city planning, built his own life. The proudest moment was his graduation day when he found me in the crowd and mouthed, "Thank you, Dad." Later at dinner, he grabbed my hand and made a promise that meant everything. "When you're old, I'll take care of everything, Dad. You sacrificed your whole life for me, now it's my turn." I believed him completely. This was the boy who brought me coffee when I worked late on blueprints, the teenager who never missed calling on Father's Day, the young man who still hugged me goodbye after every visit. Then Sarah entered the picture 3 years ago. At first, I was happy for James. She seemed charming, caring, but slowly things changed. James's visits became shorter, more formal. Phone calls turned into text messages, then silence. When they got engaged, I wasn't asked to help plan, just told when to show up. The transformation wasn't sudden, but devastating. My son, who once promised to care for me, now spoke like I was a burden rather than the father who'd raised him. The boy who sought my advice now acted like my opinions were irrelevant, ramblings from a man past his prime. Sitting among photographs of better times, I realized I'd been in denial. I'd attributed James's coldness to newlywed stress, career pressure, anything except the obvious truth. My son no longer saw me as his father. He saw me as an obstacle to whatever life he and Sarah were planning. The boy who once cried in my arms was now ready to strip away everything I'd worked for, everything that represented my independence and dignity. The promise he'd made at graduation to take care of me had been twisted into something unrecognizable. Taking care of me now meant taking control of me. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They saw a helpless old man, but I was still the engineer who'd built a life from nothing after Margaret passed on. I was still the man who'd solved problems when the stakes were highest. An engineer doesn't build without a blueprint. I needed to understand the full structure of their plan before I could figure out how to bring it down. 2 days had passed since their declaration, and the weight of unspoken tension filled every corner of the house. I'd spent those 48 hours watching, listening, trying to decode the blueprint of their intentions. But analysis only goes so far. Sometimes an engineer needs to test the structure directly. They were settled on the couch that evening, James channel surfing while Sarah scrolled through her phone. The domestic scene looked normal enough, but I could feel the shift in power dynamics, like a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. "Son, can we talk about this social security situation?" James's thumb paused on the remote. Sarah didn't look up from her screen, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Dad, we've been over this," James said without turning around. "There's nothing to discuss." I stayed calm, measured. I worked 45 years for that money. I have the right to control it. That got Sarah's attention. She set down her phone and turned toward me with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "William, at your age, you should be grateful we're taking care of you." The condescension in her voice was like fingernails on a chalkboard, but I pressed forward. This was about more than money. This was about respect, dignity, the basic acknowledgement that I was still a human being capable of making decisions. "I don't need taking care of," I said, keeping my voice level. "I need my family to treat me like I matter." James finally looked at me, and what I saw in his expression chilled me. Annoyance, impatience, like I was a child throwing a tantrum over bedtime. "Dad, we've already talked about this. The decision is final." Something snapped inside me. Maybe it was the casual dismissal, maybe it was the way Sarah was smirking like she was watching entertainment. I walked toward the filing cabinet where I kept important documents, social security cards, bank statements, the proof of ownership they seemed so eager to ignore. "Don't you dare touch those papers." James's voice cracked like a whip. He shot up from the couch, his face flushed with sudden anger. I'd never heard that tone from him before, not directed at me. "These are my documents," I said, reaching for the cabinet handle. "My social security number, my—" The push came without warning. James's hands hit my shoulders hard enough to send me stumbling backward. My legs, not as steady as they used to be, couldn't compensate for the sudden force. I went down hard, my hip connecting with the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the room. For a moment, nobody moved. I sat there on the floor, staring up at my son, trying to process what had just happened. James stood frozen, his hands still extended, looking at them like they belonged to someone else. Sarah broke the silence with slow, deliberate applause. "That's right, honey, show him who's in charge now." The pride in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't an accident she was witnessing. This was progress toward a goal she'd been working toward. James looked between his hands and my face, something flickering in his expression. For a split second, I saw a flash of the boy I'd raised, the one who used to apologize for accidentally stepping on ants. But then Sarah moved closer to him, slipping her arm through his, and that moment of recognition vanished. "He needed to understand," James said, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled myself up slowly, my hips screaming in protest. Neither of them offered to help. They just watched as I struggled to my feet, and in that moment, I understood that the son I'd raised, the boy who'd cried in my arms when his mother passed on, was gone. That night, I lay awake knowing the boy I'd raised was gone forever. Sleep had become impossible. I stared at the ceiling, my hip aching from the fall, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the mental reconstruction happening in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw James's hands pushing me, heard Sarah's applause. 40 years of engineering taught me one thing: every problem has a solution. By midnight, I'd shifted into the mindset that had served me through decades of construction projects. This wasn't about emotion. This was structural analysis. Identify the problem, assess resources, develop a systematic approach. The problem was clear: hostile takeover of my life and assets. The perpetrators, my son and his wife. Timeline, accelerating with Social Security transfer next week. But who was the real architect? James had never shown this calculated cruelty before Sarah. He was the executor, but she was the designer. I'd seen how she guided his responses, provided the emotional framework justifying his actions. This had her fingerprints all over it. Resources, limited, but not zero. I had knowledge they didn't know I possessed, relationships they hadn't considered, and 4 decades of problem-solving experience they'd underestimated, which brought me to Elizabeth Carter. At 2 a.m., I slipped out and made my way to the back fence. Elizabeth's house was dark, but 30 years of nursing had trained her to wake at the slightest sound. "William, it's me." A light flickered on. Moments later, she appeared at her back door, wrapping a robe around herself. "William, what are you doing out there at this hour?" "I need to talk to someone I trust, someone who knows I'm not losing my mind." She approached the fence, her nurse's instincts engaged. "What's going on?" I gave her the abbreviated version: James's financial takeover, increasing hostility, being pushed out of my own life. I didn't mention the physical confrontation. That felt too raw to voice yet. Elizabeth listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet. "I've noticed changes in James since he married that woman," she said finally. "The way he talks to you, the way she manages every conversation. I've been wondering when you'd reach your limit." "I need help, Elizabeth." Carefully, "I think they're monitoring my calls. I need to contact Robert Davis at First National, but I can't risk them knowing." Elizabeth had been my neighbor for 3 decades. She'd brought casseroles when Margaret passed on, babysat James when I worked late. If anyone would understand the gravity of this situation, it was her. "What do you need me to do, old friend?" "Be my communications link. Robert needs to know what's happening before they make their move official. Can you call him tomorrow?" "Consider it done." She studied my face in the moonlight. "William, are you safe in that house?" The question hung in the air. Was I safe? 24 hours ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Now, after feeling my son's hands push me to the ground, I honestly didn't know. I'm working on that. We talked for another few minutes about logistics. When she'd call Robert, what information to relay, how we'd communicate without arousing suspicion. Elizabeth's nursing background made her naturally methodical, which was exactly what I needed. As I headed back inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Monday morning. Hope. Not the naive hope that this would all blow over, but the practical hope that comes from having a plan and allies to execute it. The next morning, James announced new rules for the house. Morning coffee had barely finished brewing when he appeared, carrying something that made my blood run cold: my own key ring. "From now on, you don't leave this house without permission," he said it like announcing the weather. Sarah appeared behind him, that predatory smile playing at her lips. I stared at the keys in his hand. Car, house, tool shed. 43 years I'd carried those keys. They represented independence, the basic right to come and go as I pleased. "Those are mine now," James continued, pocketing them. "For your safety, of course." "Safety? I've been driving for 55 years without incident." Sarah stepped forward. "We can't have you wandering around getting confused. What if you got lost?" They were talking about me like a toddler who might wander into traffic. "I'm not confused. I'm perfectly capable of." The slap came without warning. James's palm connected with my cheek like a gunshot. The force sent me stumbling sideways, blood filling my mouth as I bit my tongue. "Don't argue with me, old man. You're done making decisions." His voice cracked with rage, face flushed red. This wasn't Monday's controlled announcement. This was raw fury, unleashed and ugly. Sarah's delighted laughter filled the silence. Finally, someone needed to put him in his place. She was actually clapping, like watching a performance she'd waited for. The sight of my blood seemed to energize her, and I realized this had been her goal all along. Not just financial control, but complete domination. James moved to the landline and yanked the cord from the jack. No more secret phone calls. The finality hit harder than the slap. They weren't just taking my money, they were cutting me off from the world, isolating me completely. But they'd made one error. They thought I was helpless, when I'd already established communication they knew nothing about. Think of it as assisted living, Sarah said, examining her nails, but cheaper for everyone. James stood, breathing hard, staring at his hand like it belonged to someone else. For a split second, I saw the old James, the boy who apologized for stepping on ants, but Sarah moved closer, slipping her arm through his, and that humanity vanished. You can use the backyard if you need fresh air, she continued conversationally, but the front yard and street are off limits. We'll be watching. I wiped blood from my lip, my mind working frantically. They'd taken my keys, cut my phone, established house arrest, but they'd left me the backyard, which meant access to the fence line with Elizabeth. They thought they'd trapped me, but engineers know about structural weaknesses. Sometimes what looks like a solid barrier has gaps if you know where to look. I nodded slowly, letting them think I was defeated. I understand. James relaxed, apparently satisfied he'd established dominance. Sarah beamed like a proud teacher whose student had finally grasped a difficult lesson. They grabbed their work bags and headed for the door, leaving me alone with the taste of blood and the sound of their car pulling away. I stood in my kitchen, my prison, and touched my swollen lip, but as I looked toward the backyard, I felt something unexpected. Hope. They'd made a tactical error. In their eagerness to control me, they'd overlooked the one asset that mattered most. My neighbor's kitchen window had a perfect view of everything that had just happened. 2 days had passed since the slap. My lip had stopped swelling, but the shame lingered. I'd spent the weekend like a prisoner, watching James and Sarah come and go, while I remained trapped. The backyard had become my only sanctuary. Sunday evening found me watering Margaret's old tomatoes, trying to maintain normalcy. The simple act felt like rebellion against the death they were imposing on my spirit. "William, I saw what happened. That was assault." Elizabeth's voice came from the fence line. I turned to find her standing there, face grave with concern and anger. "Elizabeth, don't minimize it," she interrupted, her nurse's training evident as she assessed the fading bruise. "I watched from my kitchen window. I saw him hit you, saw the blood, saw how they both reacted. That woman was enjoying it. Having a witness made it real, validated my experience. This is elder abuse," Elizabeth continued. "We need to call Adult Protective Services immediately." I shook my head. "I can't, not yet." "Why not?" "They assaulted you. They'll put me in a nursing home while they investigate, and James will claim I'm unsafe living alone. By the time the system sorts it out, I'll have lost everything." Elizabeth grasped the complexity. This wasn't just about stopping abuse. It was about preventing them from winning legally. "Then what's your plan?" I looked at this woman who'd been my neighbor through decades of ordinary life leading to this extraordinary moment. "I want them to face real consequences." Something flickered in Elizabeth's eyes. Understanding, perhaps approval. "You want to fight back, not just escape." "They think age has made me weak and stupid. I want them to discover how wrong they are." Elizabeth studied my face, then reached into her pocket and pulled out an old flip phone, passing it through the fence. "I contacted Robert Davis like you asked. Your old friend was shocked when I told him what's happening. He said there are ways to protect your assets they won't see coming, legal ways that will make their fraud attempts backfire spectacularly." I took the phone, feeling its weight like hope made tangible. "Robert is waiting for your call. He knows every regulation and loophole after 20 years at First National. He's ready to help." "Elizabeth, I can't ask you to get involved. It could get complicated." She laughed, steel in her voice. "William Porter, I've been watching bullies for 68 years. These two picked the wrong old man to mess with and definitely the wrong neighbor to do it in front of." For the first time in days, I felt something other than despair. I wasn't alone. I had an ally who understood the stakes, had resources I did not, and was willing to take risks to help me fight back. "What do I tell Robert?" "The truth, all of it. He'll know what to do." Elizabeth glanced toward my house, where James's car was pulling in. "But be careful, they're getting bolder. This will get worse before it gets better." As car doors slammed, I pocketed the phone and returned to my tomatoes as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I had a witness, an ally, and a plan forming. Elizabeth had seen the truth, and now she was part of the solution. They'd made their first crucial mistake, underestimating the network of relationships I'd built over decades in this neighborhood. The house had been a pressure cooker all week. James's paranoia had reached new heights, checking on me every hour, searching through my belongings, even timing my bathroom breaks. Sarah encouraged every intrusion with that satisfied smile. like watching a science experiment yield expected results. By Wednesday night, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. At 2 a.m., I slipped out to the backyard with Elizabeth's phone, moving carefully through the darkness. The cool Oregon air felt like freedom after days of suffocating surveillance. I dialed the number Elizabeth had given me. "Robert, this is William Porter. I need your help with a serious situation." "William," his voice carried decades of familiarity mixed with concern. "Elizabeth told me some of what's happening, but I need to hear it from you." I gave him everything. The financial takeover, the isolation, the escalating violence. I described the slap, the confiscated keys, the cut phone line, the house arrest disguised as care. "Jesus, William, this is criminal behavior, elder abuse, financial fraud, false imprisonment. We're talking felony charges." "I don't want sympathy, Robert. I want justice." There was a pause as he processed the steel in my voice. "What exactly do you want to do?" "I want them to lose everything, just like they planned for me." Robert was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear his banker's mind working through possibilities. "Okay, here's what we can do. It's going to be complex, but it's all legal, and it's all going to use their own greed against them." He outlined the strategy with the precision I remembered from our engineering days. Create false documents that would tempt James into committing fraud on paper, set up recording devices to capture their conversations and threats, report suspicious activity to the IRS, creating a paper trail that would trigger automatic investigations. What kind of fake documents? Property transfer forms that look legitimate but contain legal traps, bank statements showing assets they don't know exist, investment opportunities that require them to forge your signature. Every signature they fake, every form they file, becomes evidence of fraud. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of fighting them directly, we'd create a maze of legal quicksand disguised as easy money. "We'll also need recordings," Robert continued. "Elizabeth mentioned she has some old equipment from her late husband's security business. Hidden cameras, voice recorders, document every threat, every act of abuse." "How long do we need?" "Give me 1 week to set everything up. I need to coordinate with Adult Protective Services, get the IRS paperwork filed, and create documents that look authentic enough to fool them but contain enough legal landmines to destroy them." I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Anticipation, not the dread of wondering what they'd do next, but the satisfaction of knowing I was about to turn their own tactics against them. "Robert, what if they figure it out?" "They won't. They think you're helpless. They'll see opportunities and grab them without thinking. Greed makes people stupid, and these two are already proving they're not as smart as they think." We talked for another 20 minutes, refining details, establishing communication protocols, planning contingencies. Robert would work through official channels while I played the role of defeated old man, luring them deeper into their own trap. "One more thing, William. Once we trigger this, there's no going back. Are you sure you want to destroy your relationship with James permanently?" I thought about the boy who used to help me in the garage, who'd promised to take care of me. Then I thought about the man who'd slapped me and stolen my keys. That relationship is already destroyed. I'm just making it official. 1 week later, Robert called with the news I'd been waiting for. Everything was in place. The documents, the recordings, the official reports. The trap was ready. That morning, I left the bait where James would find it. The bait had been sitting in my toolbox for 12 hours when I heard James rummaging through the garage. I'd placed the fake documents where his curiosity would lead him, mixed with legitimate papers, looking important but not obviously planted. "Dad, what are these papers in your toolbox?" I made my way slowly to the garage, playing the confused old man. James held the documents Robert had crafted. Property transfers, bank statements, investment papers that looked like golden opportunities. "Oh, those," I said with practiced vagueness. "I've been thinking about what you said about not handling things anymore." James's eyes widened as he read. The documents showed me transferring everything. House, savings, investments, directly to him. "Dad, you signed everything over to us. Sarah was right. You're too old for this responsibility." He ran inside, shouting for Sarah. "He signed everything. The house, accounts, everything." I followed slowly, watching Sarah's face transform from suspicion to greed. "Seems too easy," she said, but dollar signs filled her eyes. "Why now?" "Maybe he finally accepted reality," James said breathlessly. Within an hour, they were heading to the bank, documents clutched eagerly. I watched them drive away, then called Robert. "They took the bait." "Perfect. Everything's ready." 2 hours later, they returned, ashen-faced with panic. "The bank said the documents were fraudulent," James stammered. "Signatures didn't match. They reported it to authorities." The doorbell rang. Officer Thompson stood with his partner and 2 IRS agents. Behind them, Elizabeth watched from her window with satisfaction. "We're investigating elder abuse and financial fraud," Thompson announced. Sarah shifted into charm mode. "Officers, there must be some mistake." "Ma'am," Agent Johnson interrupted, "we have recordings and witness testimony documenting threats, assault, and attempted fraud." I stepped forward, no longer the helpless victim. From my pocket, I pulled out Elizabeth's recording device, photographs of my bruises, copies of real documents, and a detailed timeline of their abuse. "You wanted me helpless and broken. Instead, you broke yourselves." Sarah's mask slipped completely. "You senile old fool, you'll pay for this," she screamed as Thompson moved to restrain her. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists like justice. James stared in shock. "Dad, what did you do?" "I did what any good engineer does with a structural problem. I analyzed the stress points, identified weaknesses, and applied pressure until the whole thing collapsed." Agent Johnson read Sarah her rights while explaining charges to James: elder abuse, financial fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. As they led Sarah toward the patrol car, she screamed back at me, "This isn't over, old man." But it was over. I could see it in James's face as reality sank in. His job, reputation, future, all crumbling because he'd underestimated the man who raised him. "Dad, I never meant for it to go this far," he said quietly. "Yes, you did. You meant every word, every slap, every threat. You just never thought there would be consequences." As police cars pulled away, Elizabeth appeared beside me. "How do you feel?" I watched tail lights disappear around the corner, like I can finally breathe again. The investigation moved swiftly. Sarah's previous victims came forward, 2 elderly relatives she'd manipulated before meeting James. The recordings Elizabeth had captured revealed the full scope of their plan, including discussions about putting me in a nursing home and selling my house. James cooperated with prosecutors, hoping for leniency, but the damage was done. His city planning job was terminated, his reputation destroyed. The life he tried to steal from me had cost him everything he'd worked for. Robert called with updates as the legal machinery ground forward. Asset freezes, criminal charges, civil suits. The very system they tried to manipulate was now crushing them with methodical precision. But the victory felt hollow when I thought about the boy who used to help me fix things in this same garage. That boy was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd chosen greed over love, money over family. 3 weeks later, James returned, broken and desperate. The knock came on a Tuesday evening, soft and hesitant, nothing like the confident footsteps that used to announce James's presence. I looked through the peephole and saw a stranger wearing my son's face. 3 weeks in legal hell had hollowed him out, left him gaunt and desperate. "Dad, please open the door, I have nowhere else to go." His voice cracked on the words. I could see him swaying slightly, like a man who hadn't slept or eaten properly in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unwashed, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, or tears, maybe both. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Sarah's in jail, I lost my job, I'm facing charges," the words tumbled out like a confession. "Dad, I know I was wrong, I was manipulated, controlled." The same excuse everyone uses when consequences finally arrive. "So, you chose her over the father who raised you?" "I was weak, I made terrible mistakes, but I'm still your son." That word, son, hit me like a physical blow. I studied this broken man on my doorstep, searching for any trace of the boy who used to build model airplanes with me on Sunday afternoons. "You pushed me down, slapped me across the face, and told me to wait to die," I said quietly. "You stole my keys, cut my phone, turned my own home into a prison." I didn't mean those words. I was angry, confused. "You meant every word. You showed me exactly who you are." James's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees on my porch, hands clasped in front of him like he was praying to a god who'd stopped listening. "Dad, I'm begging you, I have nothing left." I looked down at him, this man who'd once promised to take care of me, who'd twisted that promise into justification for abuse. The sight should have moved me to pity. Instead, I felt only the cold satisfaction of a problem finally solved. "You're not my son anymore. My son passed on the day you raised your hand to me. Please, I'll do anything. I'll get help. I'll change." Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. I stepped back and closed the door. Through the wood, I could hear him sobbing, pleading, making promises he should have made months ago, but promises from broken people are just noise. I walked to my kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee, listening as his voice grew quieter, then silent. Eventually, I heard footsteps moving away from my door. I never looked to see him leave. Months later, I opened Safe Haven for seniors in the house that had almost been stolen from me. Elizabeth became my co-director, and together we created something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal, a place where elderly people could find safety, dignity, and respect. James tried calling, sending letters, even showing up at the center once. Each time, my answer was the same: no. Other people didn't understand. He's your son, they'd say. Family is family. But they hadn't felt the sting of his palm against their cheek, hadn't heard the casual cruelty in his voice when he told them to wait to die. I learned that blood doesn't guarantee love, and some betrayals end families forever. But I also learned that starting over at 73 isn't just possible, it's liberating. Every morning, I wake up in the house I saved, surrounded by people who chose to be here, who treat each other with kindness and respect. The coffee tastes better when it's shared with friends instead of enemies. The silence is peaceful instead of threatening. Sometimes I think about the boy James used to be, and I mourn him like I mourned Margaret, completely, finally, and then I let him go. The man who replaced him made his choices. He can live with the consequences. I found something better than forgiveness. I found peace, but God gave me the strength to fight back, to reclaim my dignity when everyone expected me to surrender. This true story taught me that respect isn't inherited, it's earned every single day. Age doesn't make us worthless, it makes us wise. The gray hair on my head represents decades of problem-solving, of surviving challenges that would break younger people. Like so many grandpa stories, this one proves that underestimating an elder is a dangerous mistake. God works in mysterious ways. He allowed me to face this betrayal so I could help others facing the same darkness. Safe Haven for Seniors exists because I refuse to be a victim. Every person we've helped reminds me that my suffering had purpose. The hardest lesson: sometimes love means setting boundaries. God teaches us to forgive, but forgiveness doesn't mean accepting abuse. This true story shows that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Many grandpa stories end with reconciliation, but real life sometimes requires walking away from toxic people, even family. If my story resonates with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below about your own experiences with family challenges. Your grandpa stories matter too. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories about resilience, dignity, and finding strength when life tests us most. Remember, you're never too old to start over, and you're never too old to demand respect.